And welcome once again to Conversations with Frankie Darcell. It is always good to have you join us if you are joining us via the iHeartRadio app or if you are logged on through our Facebook page, Instagram, and of course, those that are following us on our YouTube page. Make sure that you go to YouTube as well and make sure that you subscribe to the page. A lot happening around the country and the world at this time. And of course, in one of my favorite places on the planet, the city of Detroit, where they will be selecting the next mayor. Over the last couple of weeks, we have hosted a number of those candidates. And today we have the former chief of police, James Craig, who is joining us. Mr. Craig, thank you for joining Conversations. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on your show. Looking forward to it.
Very good. Okay, so I'm going to start with some questions, but first, for people who are joining us and meeting you for the very first time, particularly with this audience, just give us some background, who you are, and why you are now in the running to become the next mayor of the city of Detroit.
Okay, well, and thank you for that. As many know, or some know, I served in law enforcement for 44 years. I actually started here in the city of Detroit in the 70s when Mayor Coleman Young was mayor. From that, of course, I got laid off and I moved to the West Coast, where I spent almost 3 decades working for the Los Angeles Police Department. I rose up the ranks, and after rising through the ranks, I pursued my ultimate goal, which was to become a chief of police. I then became the chief of police in Portland, Maine. I know some of your viewers or listeners saying, Portland, Maine? How do you leave LA and go to Portland? But I did it. I stayed there 2 years. And then after 2 years as chief, I went on and joined a Midwest city, Cincinnati, Ohio. I was trying to move closer to home. And so I ended up serving in that capacity for 2 years. And then I finally got the call that really just changed everything. I got a call from Michigan to see if I was interested in returning home to Detroit. And I did. It was a very challenging time, as you know. The city was going through bankruptcy, was under emergency management. Certainly there was a lot of work to do in terms of restoring the police department and the confidence in the communities. So it was a very interesting but challenging time. And so as going through that, certainly watching the transition from one mayor to a new mayor, which was then Mike Duggan, the emergency management left. I ended up staying, as I indicated, I stayed 8 years, and certainly during my tenure, I had an opportunity while serving as chief, also as the deputy mayor of the city of Detroit. Mm-hmm. So we did a lot of work. The mayor and I, that work started, and I'll just briefly talk about what I saw coming in the door in terms of public safety. The community had lost all confidence in the police department. The police officers' morale was very low. We had a fleet of police vehicles. Half of them weren't working quite right. There were police stations in many of our neighborhoods that were shuttered. I'm talking about the physical buildings. So we opened some police stations up. Some may remember the response time to emergency calls for service. 911 calls was about an hour. It was widely reported. Mm-hmm. Clearance rates to homicides was probably one of the lowest rates in the country at 11%. So clearly a lot of work was done. The morale was raised. We changed that around. We moved into a new headquarters, opened police stations, used modern technology in order to track crime. Many of your viewers might know about Detroit Green Light. That was something that came about after I made an assessment of what Detroit was once called carjack capital, carjack city. Mm-hmm. During my first year, by year end, there were 800 carjackings in the city of Detroit. And I think what I found odd about that, Frankie, was that the community and the police officers were desensitized. Mm-hmm. So certainly coming up with a plan like Green Light, working in concert and partnership with local businesses, leveraging that relationship, that's how we started the Green Light. But I'm running for mayor because I love the city. Like I said, I've been a public servant for 44 years. I know what it looks like to lead. I led with distinction, not just here in Detroit, but every department that I worked. And leadership is critical. But what's even more critical, when you look at the role of a mayor or governor or the president, the first role is to keep people safe. And, certainly public safety or talking about crime in Detroit certainly has been a long conversation. And while on my
Mhm.
watch, I was confident that we moved the needle in the right direction, there's still a lot that needs to be done.
Yeah.
It's just a fact of life. So that's why I'm running. I'm also, when I look at the other candidates, and this is not to say anything bad about anybody because I don't engage in that kind of behavior, but I'm the one that has executive leadership. And when, again, I touched on it briefly, but when you really look at a crisis, mayors deal with crisis. It's not the if, it's when it's going to happen. And we look at what happened in LA recently with the wildfires. We look at New Orleans, certainly with the terror attack in the French Quarter. And I happened to take a look at the executive leadership or the mayors, and it was a failure.
Yeah.
You need someone who can stand in, step up, make decisions in real time. And that's what the community expects. And that's the respect that I've earned here in Detroit as the police chief.
All right. So can we go back for just a little bit? Because there's some things that it's some questions that I have for you. And at the end of the conversation, I'll give you an opportunity for your pitch as to why you should be the next mayor of the city of Detroit. I must say to you that I was kind of taken aback because during your tenure as chief of police in the city of Detroit, you wouldn't interview with me. I sent three requests to do an interview with you as chief. And then we met on one occasion. So why want to interview with me now?
Well, first of all, this is not political.
Well, it is political. And for as much as you would like not to say it's political, you're running for mayor of the city of Detroit. So it's all politics.
I understand where you're going, but you asked me a question that I
Yes.
was to interview with you.
Right.
And, Andre, who works with me now, we talked about this.
Good.
And I told him, and I'll tell you the same thing, I don't ever recall having my staff deny a request of an interview from you. I have no reason. I didn't know you to say I don't want to interview. Look, people, in a very candid way used to call me Hollywood Craig. I never met a camera that I didn't want to get in front of. Well, it's a little bit more to that story because that was my way, in a very transparent way, to talk to the people who live and work in the city of Detroit. So I'm unaware of it. And I don't know why someone would block you. Those requests don't come to me directly. Sure. Now, it's different if you called my cell phone and you said, "This is Frankie Darcell, Chief Craig, I want to interview you." And I said, "Absolutely not." I don't remember a time and I don't know why someone would block me from interview in front of you. So,
well, let me refresh your memory on one occasion, and I don't want to belabor it, but I think it's important.
Okay.
After living in the city of Detroit for 26 years, I think that my reputation speaks for itself, and clearly there's no there's no skin in the game for me to say anything different. I worked with Andre. You mentioned him, who's currently working with your campaign. But it was concerning because I've always covered issues from the ground, lived in Detroit for 26 years, and covered the issues that were important to the community. There were 3 occasions where I had reached out to your office and your communications director, and we actually met on the red carpet at the premiere of the movie Detroit at the Fox Theater. So no, I don't want to go back and necessarily belabor it, but it was important because I wanted to talk to you about issues that were concerning to the people of the city of Detroit. At the time, working for one of the largest, most successful radio stations in the city, and making sure that that voice be heard. And I've never blindsided anyone. I've never been unfair, and I've never not giving them access to be able to respond to the very tough questions that people in a position like that were responsible for. So I got to tell you, I was taken aback that there was a request to interview with me. I just want to be transparent in my position to say to you that that was concerning and it was an issue until you went to seek the office of governor. And then there was a request for you to interview with me. So I just want to be transparent in that that was a concern when I believe that there are people in leadership that feel that they're going to pick and choose people who they're going to speak with.
In fairness, and again, I apologize. I was unaware of it. Again, like most executives, leaders, they have staff that, they don't, I mean, the requests don't come to me directly. It's rare. I mean, some of the folks in media, but I've interviewed in front of folks that I knew it was going to be a challenging interview. I shy away from it. I can name the names. Mildred Gaddis and I have interviewed many times, and Mildred has not given me a pass on any interview, but I did it. Charlie LaDuff, another one. You don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. I've interviewed in front of him. So any suggestion that I pick and choose, on the contrary, I'll interview with anyone. I just was unaware, and I have no idea why someone on my staff at that time would block it. I just don't know. And that's the truth. And that's one thing about me. And people know this in Detroit about me. I've always spoke out, spoke honestly, have integrity. I have no reason to sit here on your show and say, I understand. It would concern me too if I was sitting in your seat. But if I don't know, I don't know.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. I wanted to be able to have that conversation. Let's talk about your run for governor. I have to start here. The city of Detroit is roughly around, give or take, 82% African American. You have made it clear that you use the term consistently conservative, but you're Republican. You talked about voting for the current president at least twice from the last public interviews that I've seen you do, that you voted for this president at best prior to 2024 at least twice. Don't know if you voted in the 2024 election for this particular president. One, how do you believe as a Republican that you would lead from a policy perspective the city of Detroit that is majority Democrat and majority African American?
Okay, that's a great question. Again, this question gets asked in every interview I do, but let me start with this. First and foremost, I am a Detroiter. I was born here in Detroit. For most of my life, yes, I was a conservative Democrat. Call it a JFK Democrat. I've lived in a number of different places, and so things begin to change. Certainly, Los Angeles is a Democrat-run city. And I began to transition probably after I left LA. But what never changed, I was a conservative. And I always tell folks that the Democrat Party left me, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. So I led in Detroit, in a largely Democrat city. I was a Republican. I was a Republican in Cincinnati, another Democrat-run city. I have worked with mostly Democrat lawmakers for at least my career doing as chief of police. There's never been an issue. Now, that doesn't mean that I agree with every decision. Certainly, I would offer my insights. All the mayors that I've worked for have been Democrats. In fact, as I pointed out in my monologue in the beginning, while I was chief, I was also the deputy mayor. So I had to work with other politicians, and, I was an appointee. And nobody ever asked, well, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? But I guess one could surmise if I'm on Fox News or I'm on the cover of an NRA magazine, I wonder what he a what kind of conservative is he? So my point is that means nothing. The fact that my party leading, I am a Detroiter. This is a nonpartisan race. And I talk to Detroiters every single day. We're getting signatures on the petitions. Largely, most of them are African American, and I would surmise the majority of them might be Democrat, because we don't ask party. Just, are you a registered voter in Detroit? It makes some sense. And then the next thing, these same folks and other folks who have approached me said, I loved your leadership while you were chief of police, and I'm going to support you for mayor. And I could care less what party you're affiliated with. Because it really, when you get right down to it, Frankie, this is a nonpartisan race. I am a Detroiter first.
All right. And get that. But there are individuals, because, you've publicly have stated that you voted for this president, Donald Trump, who on many occasions has, even at this point, has written some legislation that's not friendly to African Americans. And although it is a nonpartisan race, as an individual, you voted, and I don't know how you voted in 2024, but you talked about voting publicly twice for this particular president.
I did.
Ideolo-
I'm not
yeah,
gonna, I'm not going to shy away from that, and I'll
yeah.
say
How many of it, because you would vote for an individual who you believe at least um leads in your words,
right.
philosophically and politically and ideologically the way in which you would lead. If you think that person should be president, there are things that you believe that person is doing right. And in a city like Detroit, where a number of those policies, even recently, um, are not kind to people of color, but yet that's the person you believe should lead the nation, and you support that person.
Well,
Explain to people how your support of President Donald Trump does not align with how you would govern as mayor of the city of Detroit.
it changes nothing. I learned something at a young age. My mom was a volunteer poll worker every year, so she really inspired me and my siblings why it's important to vote. But more important than just voting, she said it's not about party, it's more about the individual. So when I led as the police chief, and I'll throw deputy mayor in there, I didn't go around the city and say, are you Democrat or Republican? Because the way I'm going to police this city is going to be different for you. I'm a leader. Party has nothing to do with it. And my name is not Donald J. Trump. Okay. He's an individual. I am an individual.
How much though, Mr. Craig, my question, philosophically in terms of leadership, executive orders this president has signed, particularly that are not friendly to people of color, his position in the administration position on DEI. Do you agree with the president's position on DEI and the way in which, and you talked about, taking over or being more involved in Detroit public schools, where funding across the country is being cut. Detroit is no different. So much so that the tariffs and even those in Canada are talking about not sending power to the city of Detroit. How much of the president's legislation, because you voted for him, do you actually agree with? And especially when you want to lead as mayor of the city of Detroit, do you agree with his position on DEI?
Well, let me just break down the DEI. First of all, I can't.
No, could you answer my question?
Could you just bear with me for a moment, please?
Sure.
I came up at a time, we're talking about EEO, equal employment opportunity. Okay. And I understand that. I believe and have always believed, and this is where I separate myself from the whole DEI conversation, is I believe in merit. I believe in merit first. However, I also think it's critically important to level the playing field. And you level the playing field by putting people. So let's say, for example, and this is a philosophy I've always led by, I led this way in the Detroit Police Department. I created pathways of opportunity for all folks. But if there's an underrepresentation, I know I've mentored many African-American women by example. One went on and became the first police chief in Dallas, Texas. Then the second mentee, the first African-American woman who's a police chief in Columbus, Ohio. But if it's based on merit and the person has the requisite experience, that matters. I'll never forget, and I don't want to be long on this because I think it is important for your viewers and listeners, is that when I was a young sergeant in the LAPD, I knew and had a goal that one day I wanted to be the chief of police. Now, I'd had individuals in the police department say, you'll never be a police chief. So one day, a white lieutenant came to me and said, I'm starting up this audit unit. It's a high profile assignment. And I really would like you to apply for that position because I know that you're a good writer. And And I said, no, I enjoy working in the field, leading police officers. He said, well, let me just say this. In order for you to compete at higher levels in this organization, particularly if you want to be a police chief, you have got to have a diversity of experience. I'm giving you an opportunity to understand the administrative side of the department. I'll never forget that. And so I applied the same thing throughout my career in leading, making sure that people, it was equitable. I made sure that pathways of opportunities were open. I did it tremendously in the city of Detroit. I created new ranks so that all people would have an equal opportunity to compete based on merit. But if you don't get the experience, if people lock you out of an opportunity, it's very difficult then to compete. When I competed for the position of chief in Portland, Maine, there were 85 candidates. I didn't get that job because I was Black. I got it because I was the most qualified. When I competed in Cincinnati, there were 50 candidates. Some of them were even prior and current sitting chiefs. I got that job because I was the most qualified. And then when I came home to Detroit, I became the police chief because I was the most qualified. It was based on merit. So I stand behind that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. My question, though, is do you agree with the president's position on dismantling DEI across the country? You voted for him. Do you agree with the president's position on DEI?
I already said, based on the whole issue of merit, and DEI is different than equal up chance. That's why I made a distinction. Yes, I support it. Now, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be something in place to make sure there's equity. As I indicated, I came up during the time of EEO. I got hired in the Detroit Police Department in the 70s. It was a very different police department then. I watched when I joined the LAPD, the disparity. But merit, hard work got me to where I'm at now. Now I believe in a hand up, not a handout.
All right.
It's
You've spoken as well about improving the public school system there in the city of Detroit.
yes.
This president as well, the executive orders to dismantle the Department of Education. Your position on that, especially when it comes to funding. You look at Wayne State, you look at Wayne County Community College, you look at Michigan, University of Michigan right now, where they have had to transition into a different way that they look at minority students, grants, and programs. Do you agree with the president's position now on the way in which he is pulling funding from public educations or college and universities, where if they don't uh, uh, conform to his position on diversity, equity, and inclusion, he's going to take money? And what he did recently with Harvard, we're talking about $2 billion.
Let me just say this, and I'm going to talk about Detroit public schools because that's what I'm most passionate about. And having been a product of Detroit public schools, I'll say it, and I've said it publicly, Detroit public schools are broken. Okay. And I understand and recognize that the mayor does not control the schools. However, when you have a broken school system, and I mean broken, what does that do to the future of a city? What does it do to opportunities to work for? Direct impact. So, no, the mayor doesn't control the schools. Certainly, I think like other mayors should control it, but that's not the way it's set up now. But I do believe it's important to have a partnership with Detroit Public Schools so that the city can work with the public schools. I will use my bully pulpit to bring clarity on the problem. So, for example, shocks a lot of folks, and certainly when I ran for governor, I really got into what the effectiveness or lack thereof of public schools, not just in Detroit, but certainly in communities of color like Flint, Battle Creek, but specific to Detroit. Now, that the data might have changed some, but by the time a child reaches the third grade, they must be able to read. Because by the time they're in the fourth grade, they have to read to learn. In the city of Detroit, Detroit public schools, only 8% third graders can read. Now, that was, again, data I had gotten almost 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, and maybe that it's improved, but that's a failing grade. As police chief, if I was running a department and we were failing, whether it's response time and in all these other areas, well, because as far as I see it, the superintendent's core function is effective schools. Detroit has deserved that. They can't afford, when we talk about the transportation challenges,
Mm-hmm.
is it fair for someone who lives in an area on the east side who would like to send their child to the local school, but the local school is failing? That's not fair. And so, and I'll say this last point as it relates to funding. So it's no secret. As a Republican, I will have a relationship with the White House and I will secure funding. And there's a whole lot of dynamics. I know the president has talked about not funding sanctuary cities and certain universities where violent criminal protests or anti-Semitism is allowed to flourish in these environments. I agree. It shouldn't. It shouldn't flourish. And in fact, I hold, and we all should hold those university presidents accountable. That's not acceptable. But right now, specifically about Detroit Public Schools, I will leverage the relationship with the White House and get funding for Detroit Public Schools. And I will work in partnership with the current superintendent, even though we see things in a very different way.
All right. Could you just, I want you to just elaborate a little bit more. For those people who are watching, Reese, I want to be able to see the comments as well. Mr. Craig, we're going to take some of the questions and comments coming up in just a little bit. A number of people are logging on. I want to be able to do that. Thank you for agreeing to do the 30 minutes. If we go a little bit longer, that'll be okay, if that's okay with you in terms of timing. But you just said something about, and I hear this feedback just a little bit, but you said something about the sanctuary cities. Could you elaborate on that? I just want clarity on what you meant by that there were protests and the like in these cities. I just want to make sure that I heard specifically what you meant by that comment.
I spoke about kind of two different things. Sanctuary cities,
Okay.
Those cities, those states that refuse to work with federal authorities regarding illegal immigrants in our country. Now, specifically what the president's team has focused on, and I totally agree, that if someone is in our country illegally, an illegal immigrant who is a criminal, they need to be deported.
All right.
And local jurisdictions need to support, the federal authorities like local police. And we're talking about criminals.
Yeah.
I'm not just talking about someone who's just here illegally. So sanctuary cities have said across the line, they are not going to support working with federal authorities to deport illegal migrants who are criminals. And that's just flat out wrong. And so he made a decision to withhold funding. I will tell you a great example. So let's talk about Chicago, even though we're talking about Detroit. But it was interesting to watch Chicago when that mayor allowed illegal migrants to come into a city, sleep in police stations, then offer funding and support. And Black Chicagoans, West and South Side of Chicago, were angry. And they said, what about us? We're American citizens. What about supporting us? And so they said one thing: we're going to turn Chicago red. And so there was a big movement, still is a big movement in Chicago. Now, we didn't have that kind of issue here because technically we're not a sanctuary city here.
Correct. All right. So to that, let's talk about Detroit then in Southwest Detroit. You would not be opposed, and we know just recently there are immigrants from other countries that are being deported without due process. You're in law enforcement. Do you believe that those individuals should be entitled to due process before picked up by ICE or the federal government and shipped off to one of the worst prisons in America, in El Salvador, without due process? As mayor of the city of Detroit, would you allow citizens who are in the city of Detroit, specifically we could say Southwestern, but there are people who are immigrants throughout the city, to be deported without due process, even if a judge has said those people are entitled to, or would they be allowed to be removed
I
from the
think,
city and sent to another country without due process?
yeah, I think there's some missing points here. First of all, let me just say this: law enforcement officer for 44 years. I respect the Constitution. I respect due process. And so, for starters, we don't know all of the facts. This one El Salvadorian who was here illegally, who I'm told, and I'm not intimate with that case, that he was active MS-14, very
No,
violent.
no, he's not. No, he's not. He was not. And I know the case very well.
If
I know
you
the case
listen to
very
me,
well.
I'm just saying what I know about it. But getting back to your core question, I believe in due process. If a person is a criminal and here in our country illegally, they get locked up.
Okay. If a person is not a criminal, and due process is what determines whether or not they are or are not a criminal. I'm asking you, if
Right.
you are successful in becoming mayor, would you allow the federal government or ICE agents to remove an individual who is living in the city of Detroit to be deported to El Salvador without due process?
Well, first of all, I would always follow the law, and I've always followed the law, whether you're here illegally or not. Again, if a person commits a crime on our soil, certainly they get to go through our process, and part of the response may be deportation, because if they're engaged in violent criminal activity. And so I don't know how many times I can say it. I will follow the laws of the state, the city. We are not a sanctuary city, but we're not going to be loading folks up who are here illegally and without due process, facilitating deportation back to their homeland. I don't agree with that. I agree, though, violent criminals who are here illegally should be locked up and subsequently deported back to their home country. You don't get to come to our country and break the law. You just don't. Hey, what about American citizens? If they break the law, there's going to be consequences. Well, it depends on what city or state, because sometimes those individuals get a pass. But that's a whole nother conversation. So I'll say it for the last time. I do believe in due process.
All right. My guest, former chief of police, city of Detroit, James Craig, is my guest. He is seeking the office of mayor of the city of Detroit. Reese, we're going to go to a couple of questions coming up in just a little bit for Mr. Craig. But let me as well, we can start here. Reese, your first question or comment for Mr. Craig.
Okay, first question is from KYG, and he is asking, what is your specific plan to end gentrification of Black American neighborhoods?
That's a great question. One of the things that, we can sit here and talk a lot about all the great things that have happened in downtown and aligning areas, Corktown, Midtown, and that's great. And I applaud the mayor for his efforts. One of the things that the mayor alluded to, and I know, having been the chief here, there's still a lot of work in the neighborhoods. First of all, I remember a time where we had more African-American homeowners in Detroit than anywhere in this country. We didn't see abandoned homes. People certainly were employed, mostly in the automobile industry. But that day is gone. But what needs to happen, and I'm working with a young man now as part of the campaign, is really giving home ownership to those who have been underserved or overlooked. Like, for example, I didn't know, and this young man was telling me he can get someone in a home with a 500 credit score, but also there are programs that there can be zero down payment, and then the mortgage payment would be lower than even the rent they might be paying. There's opportunity to do that. Also, we need to focus on, when we talk about the neighborhoods, we need to do better with really encouraging and supporting small business. I'm talking about small businesses in the neighborhood. For example, I met a young lady who just recently opened a cigar restaurant bar on the east side of Detroit on Mac. And we had an interesting conversation, African-American female. And she said, Chief, I own three businesses. I said, where are your other two businesses in Detroit? And then she went on and said that, well, my other two businesses are in Dearborn. And I said,
Mhm.
why Dearborn? She said, well, first of all, her opinion, as it is many opinions, is that it's too much bureaucratic red tape in the city, whether it's zoning or whether it's, licensing, inspections. And I know another young lady who owns a very nice restaurant here on the east side, the Ivy, who's opened a second location. And she's been trying to pass inspection after inspection. So one of the things I will do as mayor is streamline that process. I understand. I come from different cities. I've seen things work well in other places. And so there is a way to streamline this process so that it's friendly. And if you start bringing small businesses back to the neighborhoods, that's how we close the wealth gap. Let's face it, small businesses of any city is the economic engine for that city. But you can't have it so hostile in terms of zoning and inspections. People are not going to want to do it. And so that's one way I would close that gap, if you will.
You've talked about transparency in the mayor's office, and you talked about, if elected, one of the first things you would do would be to have a forensic audit
Yes.
done. What is it that you've seen from your vantage point that you believe that either one, the city as the government has not been transparent, and or that there needs to be a forensic audit done before your leadership takes over?
Well, it would happen. I mean, it would only happen after I'm elected to mayor.
Mhm.
It's very important. As I indicated in my monologue, I came at a time, one of the most challenging times in Detroit's history, when the city went through bankruptcy. We have to make sure that our pensioners are paid. We need to make sure what is the financial health? Clearly, what is the financial health of our city? And in my mind, and I've launched several forensic audits as chief of police inside the department, because it's important, but not just launch the audit, but come out with recommendations and report out to the community, and not just stop there, because I don't know what this audit would reveal. But let's say if there were some concerns that there was a shortfall, what does that really translate into? And so what do we need to do? What steps should we take to close that gap and fix that?
Do you believe that there's enough there for a concern? Have there been some questionable fiduciary issues that have occurred that one of, for the lack of another term, in your first 100 days, you would do a forensic audit, especially after working with this particular mayor during your tenure as police chief?
Yes, I would do it. And I would do it not just because I'm so focused on finding something wrong. I personally, and the voters and the community, the city of Detroit, they're going to want to know, where are we at? Where are we at right now?
So do you think they don't know that right now? That's what I'm asking. So do you believe that the citizens, and you're a resident of the city of Detroit, do you believe that this administration is not as transparent, or has not been as transparent about financial records, that if you become mayor, you want to make sure citizens know that?
I didn't say that the city was not transparent. What I'm suggesting to you, that what I would do, I would launch the audit. And being transparent, there was an article written in Michigan Cap recently, and it did talk about post-bankruptcy and the status of the city today. Now, whether we believe what's written in that article, it does talk a bit about a shortfall. So what does that really mean? Are we going to be able to meet our obligations to our retirees? I don't have those answers, but I want the answers. And I'm not saying because we launch an independent audit, the audit may come back that the city's financial health is pristine. But I think you would want to know, you'd have me on the show. Let's talk about this forensic audit and the findings and what you, Mayor Craig, plan to do. What steps are you going to take to make sure that the city, if a report comes back that there's some areas that we're lacking, what steps are you going to take? We just came off of 12 years ago, the largest municipal bankruptcy in the nation's history. And I'm sure we don't want to go back there, but what decisions would I make, the city council make, to ensure that we are not underwater? So I don't have the answer to that. I don't have any hard data other than what was written in an article, but that's a concern. I think every Detroiter would be concerned about that.
All right. Reese, a question from online.
Okay. The next question is again from KYG. What is your specific plan to end the school to prison pipeline in urban Michigan communities?
And is his name KG?
KYG.
KYG. Well, KYG, I'll tell you, I couldn't agree with you more. So when I brought my example about the broken public schools and, the inability of children to read, what ultimately happens, not in every case, so these young people who don't have basic academic education move on or push through the system. Some opt to drop out, and there's a higher probability when a young person drops out of school that they enter into a life of crime. I'm not saying, again, not in every instance. So that's one thing. So that's why education is so important. But as important, so I'll give you this example. So I think the mayor did a phenomenal job at negotiating with Stellantis and building the plant here on the east side of Detroit, the first automobile manufacturing plant, the Jeep plant, in over 30 years. I mean, phenomenal. And then part of the negotiation was that that Stellantis would have to hire 3,500 Detroiters. Great. Let's hire Detroiters. But here's one challenge. Unlike when I worked at the plant, when I graduated from Cass Tech, I went to Lynch Road Assembly Chrysler. Basically, I just walked in the door, got the job, no tests. That was in 1974. Now let's fast forward to modern day automobile manufacturing. New hires have to take a basic exam. And sadly, unfortunately, a number of Detroiters who they were trying to hire didn't do well in the process. So I know the city got involved and really did a lot of work in terms of remediation. So that's that job. Then let's talk about the Detroit Police Department, because everybody said, well, how come we can't hire more Detroiters? Why are we hiring so many people from outside the city of Detroit? And so we focus on trying to hire Detroiters. We focus on getting young people in local high schools to become police cadets, which can be a pipeline to a career in law enforcement or fire suppression. One challenge, there's an entrance exam. And what we have found in some instances, some of the Detroiters had some trouble passing, but then those who did go through get, past the entrance exam. Once they get into the police academy, there's a substantial academic activity that goes on. Some of these folks come in who may have been out of the Detroit public schools, have been challenged. So, that's why I'm saying in those two instances, we have got to do better in our schools. We have got to prepare these young people for a future. And that's my way of saying, and yes, it would have an impact on this pipeline to prison.
All right. So as we get ready to close, and I'm going to come to you for your comments in just a second. And I just want to go back to the education piece as well. It has been a ballot initiative in the past in terms of whether or not the citizens wanted the uh, governance of the Detroit public schools to fall under the mayor, and overwhelmingly, the answer was no. In order to grow the city, what you just explained was that it does not have the academic prowess in a large sector of the community to be able to have the population to grow uh, the city or big industry. You use the auto and you use development. What then, as mayor, without having the school system under your leadership, do you believe you could do to contribute, or what would you do to contribute to creating a residency that could compete for the jobs that are going to be made available in the city of Detroit? But there's yet a challenge in the city of Detroit academically, getting
Right.
the population
It is.
that you believe it needs to be able to grow.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, as I indicated, Frankie, I'm passionate about this for a lot of reasons. Again, I'm a product of Detroit Public Schools, one and only high school that I attended, Cass Tech. There's 4 top high schools, public high schools that are still outstanding, but every neighbor should have a performing school. I mean, this is about our future. So you touched on something very important. We would have a challenge increasing our population because I'll give another example. There was a young lady who worked for, she's an entrepreneur now, and then I guess she worked 14 years at Rocket. And she came to me and she said, I have a son in high school. I do not live in Detroit. I live in Westland. And I live in Westland because I want my son to have a better education. And so how many others, and I've heard the same conversation with other folks who have moved outside the city because they're concerned about the level of education that their children are getting. Look, that's the kind of thing we should talk very open about. And again, I recognize the mayor can't control the schools, but as I said earlier, there's an opportunity to partner with the schools.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you this, and this is not just something that I'm talking about because it might sound good politically. When I was a chief of police in both Cincinnati, here in Detroit, I knew that at the middle school level that there were many, many challenges, especially in schools in our urban environments. Challenging. So I started something called City Camp, Children in Trauma Intervention Camp. Now, of course, you have these young people who are living in marginalized neighborhoods. Sometimes they are exposed to a lot of violence, family, friends. Some of these children are suffering from PTSD. And so as they suffer from that, that certainly impacts their learning ability. And so we went in with and I really created this program when I was in Los Angeles during my final year as a command officer there. But we went in and did a 3-day program, after school program, Monday and Wednesday, half day program on Saturday. And on that half day Saturday program, because the parents are a critical component to their children's education. So we would bring the children in with their parents. And it was amazing, Frankie, after 10 weeks, and I didn't see it in one instance, every time we did this, because I would work with the school administrator and say, give me 25 of your most challenging students. And I promise you, we will turn them around. Every time I did it twice in an LA middle school, I did it in 2 schools, twice in Cincinnati, and here in Detroit, we even adopted an entire school. And you know what I found interesting about that, Frankie, is that every time we came in and I started talking about this program, the school administrator said, I don't want anything to do with it. But at the conclusion of it, guess what? The miracle was that same group of 25 challenged children turned around, their grades improved, they weren't missing school. Now, the other component, and your listeners and viewers might say, well, how do you sustain something like that? And that is the real challenge and key, because we're talking only a 10-week program. So what happens after 10 weeks? Do they digress back to the way things were, or does this cement a new way of learning? So this is not something I just talk about. It's something I'm very passionate about, and certainly there I will continue to be passionate about our schools. And I'll go back to something I said earlier that I think is as important and probably the most important is being able to leverage federal funds out of the White House to support our schools.
All right. So my final question for you, and then you can go to your closing comments. We don't need to revisit the challenges in your gubernatorial race. We don't need to visit, the short Senate race. Why do you think now you'll be successful in this race?
Well, since you brought up the gubernatorial run, I'm convinced, had it not been for the criminals that embedded themselves into gathering signatures, and oh, by the way, I should remind you and your viewers that I wasn't the only one that couldn't make the ballot. Okay, that's first and foremost. So, of course, during this run, I now, not as a seasoned politician, but you take what you learn from the past, and so I am directly involved in the signature gathering process, along with a grassroots effort. We didn't hire some top-notch firm to get the signatures for us, like I had in my gubernatorial campaign. So we're getting the signatures. I'm optimistic. Right now, it's looking very good, and I'm so excited about my team, who many of the volunteers that have gone out, certainly to secure those signatures. And so, as it relates to my senatorial run, that brief moment I was in that, first and foremost, possibly you, maybe your viewers, but I had a very exhaustive hip revision surgery, not replacement, revision. And a revision is just simply, I had had a hip replacement 15 years ago. And they say those hips only last 10 years. Mine lasted 15. So basically, the surgeon has to go in and do the work. And I remember telling the surgeon before the surgery, I said, hey, I'm planning on running for U.S. Senate. And clearly, after I had that surgery, there was no way. So I made a business decision. I backed out of the race. I couldn't walk. I couldn't campaign. And so I couldn't even go upstairs in my home. So it was a logical decision to pull out. So yes, this is different. A lot of people ask me, even before the decision to run for governor, why didn't I run for mayor before? Well, I was never going to run against my boss, first and foremost. It certainly would have been a more natural pathway, given my background, to go from police chief / deputy mayor to mayor, but I wasn't going against Mayor Duggan. And so that was the reason why I didn't do it. And when the mayor decided he wasn't going to seek a fourth term, I saw it as an opportunity.
All right, really quickly, I just want to say this, but you would, though, to your comments about the gubernatorial run, at the end of the day, like mayor, you, though, take full responsibility for how your campaign operated.
You say I did not take full responsibility?
No, I say you would take full responsibility.
Yes.
For how your campaign operated.
Yes, and admittedly, did I know, and I'm not making an excuse for your viewers or listeners, I do take full responsibility, but the reality of it is I knew nothing about being a candidate. I knew nothing about a campaign. I mean, that's why, part of your campaign, you hire a campaign manager. And by the way, I have a great one in Andre. You hire a consultant, because you can imagine when you talk about a gubernatorial race, there's a lot of moving parts. And you hope and trust that whoever's managing, keeping the wheels on the track, that they're doing it right. Like I said, when I first started the race and I learned about signatures, and I was talking to my former campaign consultant, He said, "Oh, it's not a big deal." Well, looking back, it is a big deal. Look, 15,000 signatures is a big deal. Okay, the
That it
mayor
is.
only
Right.
need 500, but 15,000. So, but that said, I understand it, and I've had this conversation with so many folks because they want to know, what are you doing different?
All
And
right.
I'm personally involved in it.
I thank you for your time. We are well over. We're at 55 minutes. We were supposed to go 30, 35. Thank you for adjusting your calendar as well in terms of time. There's a lot happening here in our studio at the last minute and from a news perspective. So here's your opportunity. I can give you 2.5 minutes uninterrupted as to why people, when they, first of all, yes or no, close to getting your signatures to be able to be on the ballot, which
Yes.
is coming up in about a week or so.
Yes, coming up in a week. And the good news is, I'm going to tell you two things we're doing.
Really quickly, because it's going to shut off really quickly.
We have the signatures. I have a firm that's doing the validation. And then once they're done with their work, because we want to make sure we got good signatures, we're going to take them in on Monday.
All right. Now, with that, closing comments, why come August, your name is on the ballot, and people should select you to run in the general.
I am the only candidate in this race that has real executive leadership and crisis management experience. That's critical for a mayor. Some might agree it's not just because I was the police chief, but I've demonstrated time and again through crisis, non-crisis, through the good and the bad, that I am the leader the Detroiters had confidence in. And as their mayor, your mayor, I will provide that same leadership.
Very good. Thank you so much. Former chief of police, now candidate for mayor of the great city of Detroit. I'm sorry?
Now, I was just echoing the great city of Detroit. I was just echoing what you were saying.
Yeah. I thank you for your time.
Right.
Be well.
Okay. You as well.
And
you have a great day.
You.
Bye now.
Thank you. You do the same.
Thank
and
you.
Happy Easter. Happy Easter. Have an incredible
Happy Easter to you too.
Thank you. Have an incredible Easter weekend. To everyone that is watching, thank you so much. Unfortunately, I could not see them all. You were able, Reese, to see all of the questions and the comments, of course, and it goes on forever. It goes on forever. So we're going to be posting as well. We're on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and the like. I could not see them all. Reese, I don't know how many of them you are able to see. And of course, with technology, you get the frozen screen from time to time. But I do want to thank James Craig, former chief of police of the city of Detroit. He is seeking the office of mayor of the city of Detroit. And this is just the beginning. It's been extremely quiet. I am going to next week as well, because the comments keep coming in and I'm getting all of these emails and responses. I only have 2 hands. Well, I actually have 4. Reese is my other 2, but we try to do as much as we possibly can with the 4 hands we have to address the issues that you, the viewers, are emailing and texting and DMing me with some of the other candidates that they want to hear from, but that it's pretty much been a little quiet on this front. I believe a lot of it is going to pick up as we get closer to the primary, which is in August. And of course, it'll get even louder once the 2 candidates are selected. Reese, I know that we had I couldn't tell here how many responses we had, and I got to tell you, I like to vet a lot of the questions before we go on the air. But we did have quite a few. And of course, this interview will be posted. We're at 59 minutes. I've got literally now 55. I've got 55 seconds for this comment. So please make sure that you share, continue to post your commentary and your comments as well. We're going to post this everywhere. The response for the candidates from the candidates that we've interviewed so far has been amazing. And I thank the candidates for their time spending it with us. Let me take this opportunity as well, again, to say happy Easter to those who celebrate this holiday coming up this weekend. Reese, let me congratulate you. Reese started as my intern. He is a senior at St. Joe's University, and I have now brought him on to this podcast team as well. You'll never get rich working with me, but I'm going to try and do my best, Reese. But I do want to say congratulations. In less than 30 days, you will have your bachelor's degree. And I just want to say in this forum, thank you so much as we continue to develop this podcast. So thank you. All right, listen, make sure that you come back and I'll let you know exactly who our next guests will be. There are two that are in the pipeline. Most of all, for those of you who have submitted questions, I thank you for that and your comments, and I'll go back into the comments later. Again, I thank James Craig, who is a former chief of police, now candidate for mayor of the city of Detroit, for joining us. My name is Frankie Darcell. Reese, I thank you so much. All right, bye-bye. Have a good day, everybody.